Federico. My name is Kerem Cengiz. I'm the Managing Director at LWK Partners for the Middle East region. We have been operating across the Middle East now since 2018 and have been a locally registered company here in Saudi Arabia since 2020. The business is a multidisciplinary design practice, focusing exclusively in design rather than engineering. Very fortunate to be working with a number of PIF entities here in Saudi Arabia. We have good relationships with our friends at Dan and enjoying that journey with them, which is really quite remarkable and I think very apposite to today's conversation. As a business, we were established 40 years ago in Hong Kong. We have 12 international studios, 2 of which are now in the Middle East, which is a real blessing, and it's becoming a region that we see as a big hope for the future. Real levels of stability in terms of geopolitics, which makes this a great area for investment and for growth, which is absolutely being driven by what's happening in Saudi Arabia. As a practice, we participate and win numerous awards. We're within the top 30 architectural practices in the world. And the story goes on, but I'll stop for now. I think that's enough.
So this Middle East and Saudi Arabia is the place to be.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, we've all been waiting for Saudi Arabia to blossom, and what we've seen in the last 10 years is remarkable. And it's, I think, the real driver for the rest of the region. When Saudi is successful, I think the Middle East is successful. So it's wonderful to see this happening, and we certainly welcome it.
Thanks a lot. Saudi Arabia is very historical place. How you manage to combine the balance between sometimes the local architectural and sometimes the new trends, the new architecture, because our clients don't want only hotels based on local architectural style, but also want to combine between local and future and innovative design. How you balance when you have with your clients in Saudi Arabia? Kerem, you want to add anything on that your experience in?
Look, I mean, we as I said, we're working with Dan in the regions and others in the regions that are quite disparate. I mean, Saudi Arabia, as we're all discovering, I think a lot of us didn't realize how culturally diverse the kingdom was, and also geographically diverse. So I think when we look at heritage and culture, we don't always have to perceive it as being pegged purely to historical periods. It's about how people live their lives, and I think that whilst I completely agree with the context of creating a narrative around the place, I think understanding the context in which you design is absolutely critical. Whether the elements are historical, traditional or not, I think it is really predicated on the basis of what you're designing. And sometimes a more historical approach is absolutely appropriate to place, whether it be a contemporary interpretation or even a traditional manifestation as we're perceiving at Diriyah Gate. I think it's all about appropriateness and obviously the functionality around that. There's a lot of thought that's going out there. Diriyah themselves have a very deep understanding of what it is to create Najdi architecture in the context of the place, but also a very deep understanding that some of the elements delivering at Diriyah require modern context. So if you're designing a museum, traditional Najdi architecture doesn't necessarily lend itself structurally to large span buildings. So there are grades of analysis, and I think that can be very exciting as a designer to be set a series of constraints that are actually very limiting, but finding a solution to that in the context of that place is part of the design process that we have to go through. So I think both alternatives are relevant.
Thanks a lot. I believe it, because usually the hospitality in the region, we tend to speak often about Dubai. When Dubai started years ago and developed the hospitality, was the local culture, the local style is different. What started Dubai at that time and what Saudi Arabia can offer, the history, the past. the past in general. So for you, architect, sometimes it's been asked to this balance in the design. No?
Look, I think it's a very difficult comparison to make, and I think it's not necessarily an appropriate comparison to make. I mean, Dubai is Dubai,
Yeah,
Saudi is Saudi.
That's what I'm saying. It's too different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no disrespect to Dubai. One of our studios is in Dubai, and we're doing a lot of work that's very specifically geared around what Dubai does, what Dubai represents, and what it's created for itself. But Saudi Arabia has a heritage that's 2,000 years old,
and more, maybe,
and possibly more. And I think that's something that we're all discovering. Well, I'm sure it was already known by those who are living in the kingdom and born in the kingdom. But I think the comparison of hospitality in Dubai to hospitality in Saudi Arabia is sort of diametrically opposed. There are different functionalities. The work that we're doing with entities such as Dan is very focused at an internalized market. Dubai is very much focused at attracting tourists in that are more internationally focused. So I think the comparators are quite different. And I think, when we work here, we don't look at Dubai or other places, we look at the kingdom. What does the kingdom need? What are the demographics of the people who are going to visit the resort or the hotel destination that they're selecting? And so if you compare the different entities that are working in hospitality, their DNA is fundamentally different. What's going on at Amala and Red Sea is completely different than what's going on at Dan. And obviously I don't need to talk about that. That's something that this gentleman can talk about in great detail. But the diversity that is being offered in the kingdom is so radically detached from what's happening in Dubai. It's infinitely more interesting, to be honest. That you can be approached by 3 different hospitality entities, and each one demands something uniquely different. And that, as a designer, is a massive treat. I mean, how often do we get to do that? It's sort of once in a generational experience.
Thanks. Karim, going back to what we were discussing before, the region itself, do you think there is a risk that the hospitality market gets saturated, or there is too many alliances between projects? There is a risk the project become anonymous to each other, or there is still a lot of space?
Look, I mean, as I was saying earlier on, there is a lot of space for growth within the sector. However, there is also a point at which certain choices need to be made in terms of saturation. If we see a number of entities that are emerging that begin to have a DNA that's not a million miles away from each other, and when you see those developments all clustering around similar locations, at some point, inevitably, some assets are going to suffer at the expense of others, or some of them are going to benefit at the expense of others. And so, we hope to see, and as I think we're beginning to see, a rationalization of how the developments are relating to each other, how they're talking to each other, what the benefits are of perhaps collaborating on initiatives together as opposed to going alone. That also has benefits in terms of how the expertise that sits and resides within entities can be shared and streamlined, rather than continuing to grow entities that have to relearn the lessons of previous entities that maybe have been launched before themselves. I think there is still space in the market, and I think when we look at the internalized market, there is space, but that space will get filled very quickly. I mean, certainly in hospitality, there are certain parallels to the retail industry as well. It's, obviously, when you're looking at destinations, you want to capture market share. Yes, you have different segments and different points of price, and so if everybody goes for a 5-star, there's going to be a saturation of 5-star. If nobody's going for a 3-star, that's going to be the segment that's going to be open. There is an old adage, first in, best dressed. The one that hits the ground first, captures the imagination, will be the one that succeeds the most. So I think that's going to be something that they've all got to look out for, or look for differentiation in terms of their market share and their market target. So I think that it's something that probably requires a little bit of focus, and I think that focus is coming.
Okay, thanks very much. Are the Saudi firm getting the touch of the international experience of the international architect firm that are coming here, and there is collaboration. This collaboration is beneficial for the Saudi firm.
As an international business that's invested in Saudi, I mean, we are a locally registered entity. We're looking to set up our regional headquarters here. Whilst our corporate origins may be from Hong Kong, what we're trying to achieve is to be a local Saudi business, but with an international heritage and pedigree. And so we as an entity, and I believe a lot of other international companies probably share the same vision, is that we want to be a local business. You know, you come in, you invest time, you invest effort, a lot of effort. Why? Well, because you want to be here for the long term, and to be here for the long term is about becoming local. And so it's about, as you said, Rosa said, about collaboration, sharing, gaining knowledge, and then the market becomes developed, and we all benefit in that cross-cultural fertilization, but we all become localized.
Thanks for that. I say that because it's happened a few times, fortunately already. First time it's happened a few years ago, where I was attending a conference. I was a local entity here. I was speaking with one of the bigger architect firms in Saudi Arabia. I said, why are not working together? And this local entity in Saudi say, because this even is probably the bigger architect firm in Saudi Arabia, because don't have international experience. I hope, and I was not ready for that answer personally. So I hope that during the time, this is a gap that will be filled, because it should be a combination, but don't means that be Saudi and you are not good enough for project. That's what's coming from a client here in Saudi. So I hope that this is coming. This gap is, if there is a gap, is coming to close as soon as possible.
I think there'll always be an element of belief that, particularly in a market that's evolving quite quickly, that an external expertise brings something more than local expertise, and I think that's unfortunate, because ultimately, but it's something that we see everywhere. I mean, I've worked in Southeast Asia, I've worked in Australia, I've worked in the former Russian republics, and as they opened up, it was always that perception that international was better than local, but in time that changes inevitably, and I think it's really important as a business that's coming in and benefiting from the opportunities that are here, that we contribute back to the economy, not just through taxation, but also, I mean, one of my staff is here, put your hand up, he's a local Saudi, he's making a contribution to the business, and that is part of our responsibility, whether it's Saudization or not. I think we as businesses have to contribute more than just monetarily to the growth of the market that we're occupying.
Thanks, Robert. Shahzad entered in some point of his intervention about the knowledge, the experience of the local market. Do you see enough knowledge and enough in the local market for all these projects that are coming out?
Look, I think it goes back to an earlier point I said in terms of rationalization, but it also marries up quite nicely what Mohammed was saying about earlier on about training, and that's happening. And I think his point was very apposite. It's, we don't want an industry that's very stratified. You may have a whole generation of people who want to be managers and GMs, but you've got to look after the operational aspects of the business. I think one of the things that we perhaps perceive is that there does need to be we're having a lot of local assets being generated, and it would be, from our perspective as designers, fine. We're working with a lot of international operator brands, but it would be, if we want the industry here to really flourish and it become a self-sustaining industry, the local brands need to be, not franchised out to Harriet's or Hilton's or whoever it is that they're going out to, and that may be the way we need to start at the beginning. But the long-term ambition would be to have local brands owned and operated by local brands. And so having those operational guidelines in place for local brands is something that we'd love to see, and how that then distributes across the local network would be really, really interesting to see that development. I think that would support what you're saying. Maybe there will be a hospitality institute in Saudi, and you don't have to go to Switzerland, and people from Switzerland will start coming here.
But I believe there are already many projects, hospitality school or the initiative that try to. Red Sea is one of the first non-profit project.
Yes.
They have internal school for hospitality and internal stakeholder who are educating the new generation of hospitality hotelier. No?
I think, look, I think that education side is interesting. I'm more talking about operational guidelines. In the end, as a designer, the operator has a massive influence on how the design evolves. Okay, that operator may not hang on to that asset for more than 12, 15 years, and then another operator comes in, and every time another operator comes in, it dilutes the original vision of the project. And so I think what I'm advocating is having a set of operational guidelines that are owned and centralized and relevant to the operators and the developers in Saudi Arabia that can compete with the international brands. That would be my hope and expectation.
Do you believe, especially the big brands, big hotel operator, do you believe they will be willing to change their standard and their procedure to the local, to adapt to the local market sometimes?
I mean, I think that's fine to advocate international brands all the time, but I'm talking about really advocating the development of their own brands in country. And I think, if we always focus on the international brands, we don't actually contribute to the 2030 vision, which is about creating its own sustainable industry, and that also includes supporting brands. So everything that you're saying is completely valid, and I don't disagree with it. But the thrust of, I think, the question that you were asking was about creating a sustainable industry that's Saudi-based, and that's. I think I'll leave my final contribution on that.
There is already some PIF entities that created their own the hotel management companies. Is going that direction, for example?
I believe so. I believe that there is that is occurring. How that gets rolled out across all the different entities, or whether that only stays with one or two entities. I mean, we're working with Boutique Group. They're talking about their own operational guidelines as well. So, but do we reinvent the wheel each time? That's the question.
Thank you for the panelists, and thank you to you guys.